About Subhash ji, I think I need not introduce him to this gathering. He's been an administrator, and all of us know that at one point or the other, human rights activists stand opposite to the administrator. There's always a fight going on between what is considered to be human rights, how we look at human rights, and how the administrator look at human rights. So once when I was on the street shouting slogans for Manavadhikar, there was me beyond the barricade. And both of us looked at each other, said hello and smiled. And then we said next time we'll sit together and have some tea. So Subhash ji has done a very, very commendable work. Although he is an administrator, the book that he has written, and the book, because there are very few books that talk about human rights in a comprehensive manner. You have succeeded in doing it. I also head the PUCL in Bihar, the People's Union for Civil Liberties. And I would also request my friends in PUCL to go through the book in order to know about the details and, very importantly, the history of evolution of human rights. Because and then on to the constitutional struggle and also the beginning of the realization of the rights of man in England. About even 10 pages. And his must have been an arduous task of going through all the sources, then compiling those, putting his opinion in his book, and then finally printing the book. Sharma for this excellent. I would now like to request, and this is really an honor for me, to request my colleague, the head of the Department of English, Patna University,
Mrs. Justice Anjana Mishra, Dr. Subhash Sharma, the author of this book, my colleague, Professor Daisy Narayan, ladies and gentlemen. This book is called Human Rights, Texts and Context. I shall first deal with the context and then come back to the text. I remember being here about a month ago when Dr. Subhash Sharma had released a book which was translated by Dr. V.K. Jha from the Department of English at Sindhu Kanu Murmu University, Dumka. And this was an anthology of 21 short stories called Speechless and Other Stories. In that, there was a very, very clear-cut shift from the urban to the rural, from the lives of individuals that are frequently narrated in the metropolis to those lives which are voiceless, and those that are completely disadvantaged and located in a fairly grey area within the rubric of what we normally call human existence. And in those short stories, one notices the word, and a very key word that Professor Daisy Narayan had used, a word called empathy. The dignity of human individuals seems to be very central to the consciousness of Dr. Subhash Sharma. And to my mind, the whole idea of human rights actually stems from this idea of human responsibility. We claim that we are the highest form of creation, but we have a certain responsibility to non-human creation as well, as much as we do toward the disadvantaged living in our society. The erudition in this book that comprises 252 pages, if you exclude the bibliography, cannot really be done justice to during a short period of time. But the one thing that I know is that having received this book fairly late, I almost feel like the family member of a constable in southern Kashmir, very, very terrorized. Over the last few months, I have been going around to several places, universities, institutions, talking about the whole idea of humanism and the crisis that exists in the humanities as a discipline that is academic in nature, and the crisis that actually faces us. And the crisis is really about being human. And this is exactly where we look at the possibilities of human rights violations that are perpetrated through acts of violence. I would refer to the Slovenian philosopher, a person called Slavoj Žižek. And he talks in terms of two kinds of violence: subjective violence and objective violence. Subjective violence is performed by clearly identifiable agents. So if you have a case of sexual violence taking place, there are identifiable agents. If you have a lynching that takes place, there are clearly identifiable agents. But if you notice that there is another form of violence which is actually incited and sustained by what is known as objective violence. Now, before I move on, I think it's necessary to define violence so that we know that we are on the same plane of understanding, which is, of course, any obstruction to the freedom of choice with responsibility that comes in the way of equality and justice. Now, objective violence, again, are of two kinds. One is symbolic violence, and this symbolic violence is embodied in language. And I will discuss this just after I've spoken very briefly about systemic violence. Systemic violence arises from the hegemonic viewpoints that obstructs the smooth functioning of the state's economic and administrative apparatus. And this is something that we see in terms of what we imagine a smart city that ought to be. Or let's say during the Commonwealth Games that were held in Delhi. Delhi was all spruced up. But the people who were involved in the construction for the Commonwealth Games, they were neatly put away, hidden, silenced, completely voiceless. This epistemic violence is sanctioned and disseminated by the institutions of the state. Now, coming back to the whole idea of how violence actually originates in language, and informs our attitude, I would like to go very briefly into the Western world and deal very briefly again with the epistemological and the ontological knowledge formation that actually starts with Aristotle's law of logic. The first law that Aristotle speaks of is the law of identity. Very simply, X is X, or man is man, or white is white, or Indian is Indian. And the second law is the law of non-contradiction, which means X cannot be both X and not X. In other words, man, if you substitute X for anything else, man cannot be both man and not man. And the third law is the law of excluded middle, which means X can be either X or not X. Now if you look at the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle, one realizes that they assume certain qualities and characteristics that constitutes an essence. And this essence is fixed, permanent, exists forever. And therefore, taking off from there, we realize that man is different from woman, animal, or plants. White is different from black or anything else that is colored. Now this has very, very serious political implications. Man, let us say, coming back to the old example, is rational, is political, is moral, and therefore fit for public life. Woman, on the other hand, cannot be woman and not woman. She can be either woman or not woman. Now if man is rational, moral, and fit for public life, woman, by the same standards, would be declared unfit because she can't be man. And therefore, she is completely excluded. Now this law of identity, as we can see, is hierarchic, it is coercive, and this is exactly how you have this whole idea of the master and the slave. And what it does is to confirm the inferiorization of the other. Women, slaves, castes, classes, races, ethnicity, different forms of sexual orientation. So, what it does is that it encourages the partitioning of the world in various refugee camps, as if it were. And, of course, between those who deserve rights and those that don't deserve rights. And it is here that I would like to talk very briefly on the whole idea of the public sphere. The power of the state institution actually grows with the whole idea of the lack of power in the public sphere. Recently, Neeraj Chandok, a person who headed the Department of Political Science in Delhi University until about 2 years ago, she wrote a wonderful article. And this article was all about the whole idea of the state, civil society, and people. In order to protect the people from the unfairness and inequalities and injustices of the state, there has to be a credible and effective civil society. And therefore, today when I look at this book, Human Rights, Text and Context, I do believe that this is a product of that civil society that wishes to educate the people, making them conscious of their rights. And therefore, this is a very, very significant and very important book. This is probably the theoretical premise that informs the text of the book Human Rights that has been penned so admirably well by Dr. Subhash Sharma. Now, to the introduction, as I said, this is a 252-page book. And when we go to the introduction itself, he talks about the term human rights and says it's very broad and it's also very contentious. And he says that rights and entitlements that are essential to all human beings, and later on he'll talk about entitlements as a term that Amartya Sen uses. So he talks about irrespective of their class, caste, sex, place of birth, language, religion, race, ethnicity, status, rank, educational qualification, nationality, ideology, political affiliations, religions, types of jobs. And the second he speaks of, these rights are available to all simply because they are born human. So it's a birthright. The human right is an absolute birthright. Third, the core values of such rights are dignity, equality, liberty, security, fraternity, progressive ideology, freedom from fear and hunger. Fourth, that these rights are universal, indivisible, and inalienable. Very significant point that he makes. And finally, these are human rights that are legally and constitutionally mandatory. Professor Daisy Narayan drew her attention to the chapter entitled Evolution of Human Rights, in which, first of all, he speaks of the social contract theorists Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Rousseau, and then moves on to talk about John Stuart Mill, Thomas Jefferson, and finally he comes down to talking about Marx. And this is a section which I'll briefly focus on. He talks about the violation of human freedom, which is rooted in the capitalist system that could be eliminated through the class struggle by the workers. And he talks also of the dominant ideology of the dominant class that took the form of laws and even morality, which was essentially a class morality. That all children should have right to free public education, which still remains a distant dream, despite the fact that we have enacted in 2009, if I remember right, the right to education. And finally, he goes on to talk about the fact that human beings should return to universal nature through universal means, that is, each according to his ability, to each according to his need. The interesting facts about this particular chapter, as Professor Daisy Narayan pointed out, are the non-European origins of human rights. Because what normally happens is, we are wonderful plagiarists, especially in the post-colonial period that we live in. We borrow indiscriminately and we borrow most unwisely. We borrow our education system, and in borrowing this form of an education, we cause major exclusions as well. So this is probably something that he has mentioned and written down in some detail. For example, he talks about the Rig Veda and quotes, "Nobody is high or low, all are brothers, all should work for the interests and progress of all." And then talks about the equality that the king must display toward his subjects. The king should be equally popular among Aryans and the Shudras. And talks about the Atharvaveda, talks of equal right to food and water to all. Now there are certain paradoxes and contradictions when he mentions the Manusmriti, which is of course highly contentious in our times. So on the one hand, wherever women are worshipped, there live the god, and on the other hand speaks of complete control of the woman in terms of their fathers during their childhood, husbands during their youth, and sons during the old age. But what is very interesting here is associated with what is mentioned specifically about Mahavir and Buddha. The first is associated with the principle of live and let live and of non-violence. And Mahavir observes humans are one, and he meant winning over inequality by controlling one's mind. And very, very importantly, from both these philosophical traditions, what we have is the respect for non-human ecology. Animals and birds should not be killed for religious sacrifice. Herbal and fruit-bearing trees should be planted. Digging of wells and planting of trees should be done on both sides of the public path. And so this particular chapter goes on talking about peaceful and meaningful coexistence between human and non-human life. He goes on to talk about Akbar's Deen Ilahi, goes on to speak of Guru Nanak, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, talks about Jyotiba Phule, probably the first person who used the word Dalit, and talks about education, quality education for all, particularly girls and the weaker sections of society. And thereafter, that section on child labor that Professor Daisy Narayan pointed out actually comprises 82 pages. And that is, again, one of the most meaningful sections of the book. 70. He speaks of the Dalits. And that, again, is a section that speaks of inclusivity in our society. The word Dalit, of course, as we know, means broken, scattered. And this particular word came into existence largely with the Dalit Panthers movement in 1972, with Dalit assertion itself. And of course that you have that entire debate going on between Ambedkar and Gandhi, and one of the foremost critics, and probably one of India's best known critics, happened to be somebody called D.R. Nagaraj, who actually speaks in terms of Gandhi and Ambedkar recognizing each other's value in private, but never proclaiming it to the world. On the one hand, one observes that Gandhi sought to change people through the policy of moral regeneration, which unfortunately does not work, whereas Ambedkar intended to do it with legal, within a legal framework. The important thing that he speaks of again is associated with the issue of governance and ethics. And I see that he has quoted a friend of mine, a sociologist called Dipankar Gupta, who speaks of in a functioning democracy is just an accident, while a dysfunctional democracy, such accident is nearly always a tragedy due to corruption and greed. And so we move on to corruption. And it's one of those things that every year for the last few years I've had this onerous responsibility of going to the Department of Income Tax and delivering an hour-and-a-half lecture on corruption. So today when I saw this book and I read through the first few paragraphs on corruption, what it did is I had a terrible day, and it brought a smile to my face, because we know that corruption can't be eradicated, can't be rooted out, and quite obviously in this particular country a lot of work needs to be done, and particularly so in the field of education. Because primarily what corruption does, it negates Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, which is equality before law and equal opportunities before the law. And what corruption does is to completely negate that particular article. So this, very briefly, is what I had to say about the book. I would end by congratulating Dr. Sharma for having written this book, and I really wish many people are able to read this book, to understand the book, because this book has actually, it does not merely have abstract generalizations. Anything that is mentioned is backed up by a huge amount of compiled data, which means that he provides empirical evidence for every statement that he has made in this book. And that is what gives a book its authenticity. Congratulations, Dr. Sharma. What a fine effort. And I really hope that people read the book than merely put them in the shelves of their personal libraries. Thank you for your patience.
और इन अधिकारों से हमें कोई अलग नहीं कर सकता है. These are inalienable rights. Nobody can take these rights away from us. And these rights, as another great human rights activist from Bihar, Professor Prabhakar Sinha always says, that these rights have been enshrined in the constitution of most of the countries. And even in the Indian constitution, the chapters that deal with fundamental rights, that contain many of these rights mentioned in the 1948 United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And the second that he said was about the Indian context of human rights, coming to Jain philosophy, and from Jain philosophy taking it on to the modern context. That when we talk about human rights, please do not forget that we are not talking only about our rights. We alone cannot exist in this world. So when we talk about human rights, we talk about the environmental rights, we talk about the rights of the animals also to live in this world, for the trees to grow, for everything that is living and, as Mahavir says, non-living. So this is how comprehensive the concept of rights are. So with that, I once again thank Professor
Madam Sami, Maniva Sami. So we must welcome her before.
And all of us are very proud to have Anjana as a judge.
She has been my teacher, and whatever be it, I can always say that we loved her so much that we always heard her word by word.
Today not Teachers Day.
We just finished.
She's always a teacher.
Yes, yes, please. Or you can speak from there.
And thank you, Mr. Sharma, for inviting me here for this wonderful occasion where a book which is the product of an arduous effort which may have stretched across months, to be here to release it. The book has been dealt with by my senior Daisy Di and Dr. Shankar Dutt. They are veterans in this line for evaluating all the fine nuances, and a book on human rights is so much of an help to people who do not know about it. To start from scratch, a person who has been in the administration has gone deep into the history, right from the Babylonian days till today. He has traced the history of human rights. He has not only ventured into a field which all of us are involved in our day-to-day activities, but he has also gone through deep pains to see that none of the aspects of human rights have been left uncovered. Now what is most important, as Daisy Dee was pointing out, was human means only for the man. There is a section of women liberationists who feel that no, women have been kept and given a low key. But that should not be the approach of any woman. A woman is also a man. That is why the word woman comes in. Human and woman rhyme, and we must always not forget that a woman's rights have to be considered in its entirety at all stages and at all points of time. Whatever be the outcome of our efforts, the energy should come from within to protect the life, liberty, for the safety of every man and woman which constitutes humanity. Humanity doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in the context of its environment, and as Dr. Sharma has brought out beautifully, in his book he has given much importance to the animals, the plants, the surroundings, trees and everything. So he has tried to give a voice to the voiceless as well. Animals are voiceless, so we need to protect them. Human rights doesn't alone mean that it should be confined to humanity. Life signifies humanity, and life with those who do not have the voice to express it is the duty of the humanity to protect. So, let me say once again that human rights is a universal concept and a daily affair. It is not a one-day affair, and though it has been coming down from the ages, each step every one of us takes is towards its achievement. So, whatever laws are evolved, it is towards protection of human rights. Dr. Sharma has also brought in a beautiful chapter with regard to children. Children's rights are of utmost importance. They are our future. They are the future of humanity. Therefore, if we do not attach importance to their welfare, their safety, their growth, then no matter how much of education we impart and how much success we bring on the economic front, the future will be dimmed. So, what I notice is that acts which have come are towards the welfare of children. We have an act known as the POXO Act. That act gives ample protection to children, especially girl child, and their protection is envisaged in that. But how many cases are being reported today? Is it not a violation of human rights that small children are picked up and they are violated? They are sexually abused and then dumped. So, the reality lies that unless our psyche improves, human rights can never be enforced. So, human psyche has to be bettered in all ways. No amount of legislation can help us unless and until a human being himself realizes that he is human. You see, we had 3 judgments last year and 1 judgment related to the emancipation of Muslim women. The triple talaq case. Though there was much criticism from many fronts, but it was a step ahead in enforcing human rights. The right of a woman to decide the right of a man to not insult her, and she alone can now be the master of her fate so far as matrimonial matters are concerned. So this was a very, very valiant step on the part of the judiciary to enforce human rights. We have other cases as well. Yesterday also there was a beautiful judgment in which much attention has been given by the learned judges, and they have expressed their will towards emancipation of those who are not equally partnered, and now they have their togetherness cannot be challenged. There is decriminalization. Section 377 has been set aside, and we hope that it will be a step forward. It may be new to our country, and as Justice Malhotra said, history, we have to answer history, and we are ashamed that we are doing something which had been done way back by the French. They were the earliest persons who had decriminalized it. So, humanity and human rights have to grow. They cannot be encompassed. You have to change according to the environment that grows each day and changes every day. So unless and until we adopt a wider outlook in our lives, improve upon our psyche, stop creating hurdles in the implementation of laws, there is no hope for us. A book written by Mr. Sharma is before us today. He has taken deep pains. He has pointed out on each issue the problems which hinder the rights of humanity. It is a human right which is there with every person, and it is us who create the hindrances. As it was pointed out that it is a right which everyone has from birthright. But if he is unable to have it or be proud owner of it and exist without fear, then the entire concept of human rights fails, and it is alone us who can enforce human rights. So far as the book is concerned, it also deals with rights of women. When he came to invite me, I expressed my grievance, and I told him it is not fair. You have dealt with the children, but you have not dealt with the women. Yes.
Another volume.
So I have requested him, while expressing my grievance, that he should, in his next edition at least, bring about another chapter, as Daisy he has pointed out. So with these words and very hearty congratulations to Sir Mr. Sharma, I will end this small speech.
Positive examples. Those of us not in the judiciary would also speak of the negative examples, but it's wonderful to be with positivity. It's always good to be with positivity and to look at the positive results. So that was very well spoken, and thank you. The very hard work, the problems that Dr. Subhash Sharma must have faced while writing the book. So may we have Subhash Sharma, please, for your piece.
Maji, Madam Justice Indra Misra ji, Dr. Tata and Dr. Daisy Narayan and friends. In fact, I joined in 1996 as the Labour Commissioner, and I found that child labor is prevalent all over India and particularly in Bihar, and they are exploited in different ways. Therefore, I have written a book on child labor in Hindi, Bharat Mein Bal Mazdoor. That was the first book in Hindi on child labor. Afterwards, I have been writing on different aspects, and I realized, in fact, I had written a book on women also, that is Bharati Mahilaon Ki Dasa. So entire gender issue has been dealt with there in that book. Therefore, I didn't repeat it here. However, I have pointed out some things. The entire SEDA, the entire act, I have given in appendix there. As far as French Revolution is concerned, I have criticized it for two reasons. One, it is written that rights of man and citizen. So I have said that why it is only rights of man, why not rights of women? And second, why only rights of citizen? Because slaves were not given the rights, and white women even were not given rights. Not only colored women, but also white women were not given this right. So in that respect, it was not true revolution, holistic revolution. In fact, in 1791, Olympe de Gouges, it was she who wrote about the right of women, and she circulated that proposal in the Assembly of France. And there was a lot of criticism, particularly from men, political leaders, etc. But she was very forthcoming and straightforward, and it had very good effect. So, somewhere in two articles I have written in details about women, and that is going to be coming in new book about gender. So, therefore I did not repeat it. Second, I have been administrator, of course, but I have certain kind of empathy for the deprived people. Whenever I meet them, I have realized that from the angle of the deprived, I was in education board, so I always looked from the angle of the children, not from the angle of teachers or administrators. So that's why I also wrote books on education. 3 books I have written in Hindi on education, because I realized that child-centered education is more required in place of teacher-centered education. Unfortunately, in our society, we often respect the teachers in such a way that we forget that if a child is not able to follow, we think that it is his incapacity. Whereas modern researches have shown that it is not incapacity. There are certain barriers. That barrier may be because of poverty. That barrier may be because of upbringing of the child. That barrier may be because of surroundings, neighborhood, etc. Because of exploitation by some other community, other group, etc. Therefore, there are some children who are slow-paced learners, but that's not because of their incapacity. Later on, they pick up very fast, and they come to the same level playing field. So, I have been realizing that various human rights are violated in different arenas, not only in police, but in other departments also. Various researchers have also shown that political parties are the worst violators of human rights. 86% violations are done by political parties, 75% by police, 65% by education department, 45% by income tax department, and 45% by judiciary. So, different wings of government have been violating human rights. And corruption, corruption is prevalent in all wings of government. It is executive, legislature and judiciary. And I have given certain examples and certain theoretical backgrounds also that how it is prevalent. You know that there are 3.3 crores of cases all over India pending in different courts, from lower courts to Supreme Court. Of course, only judges are not responsible for that. Most of our friends, advocates, they take adjournments more often. But it is also fact that most of the people are deprived of because of pendency. A person is put in jail for 18 years and after that he is exonerated. That means that for 18 years he has lost his life. Who is responsible? Of course, judiciary is also responsible, along with administration, along with society, along with the state. Because if somebody is not guilty, he is not found guilty, and he is in jail, what has happened? That means our entire system has failed. In different countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan and Middle East countries, they are failed states. But our country is democratic. But our democracy is not becoming great. It is very large. We are largest democracy in the world, but we are not greatest democracy, because we are not deepening it. Our quality of democracy is not at par with Western countries, particularly Nordic countries. Why? Because we want to have our human rights, but we forget that what are our fundamental duties. Fundamental duties and rights are complementary and supplementary. If we want to move on the road and have a stick, we should also ensure that stick does not touch other's body. Similarly, in different arenas, we should ensure that when we try for protection of our human rights, we should also try to protect the human rights of other beings. Therefore, I appeal all of you that in this country, in this globe, there is thinking that there should be denuclearization. Nuclear bombs should not be exploded because it is going to be very anti-human, anti-people, etc. But our expenditure on military is increasing every day. Not only about India, all the countries, almost all the countries. So that means that despite being democracy, despite being very conscious about our human rights, we are not able to do justice with the people. America, Russia, France, China, all these countries are the biggest arms exporters. So arms race is still increasing. So therefore, there should be an attempt that there should not be third world war, which may be because of water disputes about international rivers, about various pacts between different countries which are being violated by one or other. We know about Indus Valley, Indus River, etc. So in this August Assembly, I hope that we will be protecting others' rights also. Thank you very much.
Of their house since morning. They have not returned. And other friends. Indeed, it is a matter of pleasure for me to release this handbook written by Subhash Sharma on human rights on this August occasion. Let us first discuss as to from where the human rights came. The idea that human rights should have set a basic rights, basic rights and freedom had deep roots in Britain. Landmark developments were first Magna Carta of 12,015, second Habeas Corpus Act 1679 and third Bill of Rights 1689. The atrocities of the Second World War made the protection of human rights an international priority. The United Nations was founded in 1945. It allowed allowed more than 50 member states to contribute to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted in 1948. This was first attempt to set out a global level of fundamental rights and freedoms shared by all human beings. In Britain, human rights are protected by Human Rights Act 1998. This act made these rights parts of domestic law. A human rights-based approach to the development, peace and security is the surest guarantee of the success. Human rights are basic rights and freedoms that belong to every person in the world, from birth until his death. They are relevant for all of us, not just to those who face repression or mistreatment. They protect us in many areas of our day-to-day life, including our right to have and express our own opinions, our right to education, our right to private and family life, and our right not to be administered wrongly or punished by a state. According to United States human rights, it is to ensure that a human being will be able to fully develop and use human qualities such as intelligence, talent, conscience, and satisfy his or her spiritual and other needs. Human rights are completely understood as being those rights which are inherent to the human being. The concept of human rights acknowledgement that every single human being is entitled to enjoy his or her human rights without distinction as to race, color, sex, language, religion, birth, or other status. Human rights are legally guaranteed by human rights now. It protects individual and group against atrocities which interfere with fundamental freedoms and human dignity. They are expressed in treaties, customary international law, bodies of principle, and other sources of law. Human rights places an obligation on the state to act in a particular way and prohibits states from engaging in specified activities. However, the law does not establish human rights. Human rights are inherent entitlements which come to every person as a consequence of being human. Treaties and other sources of law generally serve to protect formally the rights of individual and group against actions or abandonment of actions by government which interfere with the enjoyment of the human rights. A lot of things have been stated, I don't want to repeat them. I will like to end up, and before parting the function, I express my gratitude and thankfulness to Subhash for giving me the opportunity to be here on this august occasion. And I must appreciate his efforts to highlight the human rights in SW, which is divided into 11 parts, providing an overview of the following areas: evolution of human rights, secondly, perspective of human rights, thirdly, dynamics of human rights in India, fourthly, conceptual and legal aspects of child labor, fifthly, trends, causes and consequences of child labor in India, sixthly, dynamics of human labor in India and others, namely domestic child labor and inclusion of Dalits, dead works, roots and eradication of terrorism, governance and ethics in India, and lastly corruption. I am quite sanguine that this book will be useful in several ways to teachers, students, intellectuals and general leaders. It is hoped that this handbook will familiarize the public in general with human rights standards and mechanisms and thus enable them to take account of the overarching principle of human dignity that should be reflected in all the activities. Thanks to all.